Hi, I'm David with EV World News, where we disagree on all kinds of electric vehicle topics and green energy. I'm back in the studio today with our founder and chief editor, Bill Moore. How's it going today, Bill?
Hey, it is going fabulous. I had my daughter here over the weekend, and it was good to see her again.
Did she point out the amazing number of gas cars in Nebraska?
The amazing number of what cars? No,
Gas cars,
no, no.
like you do when you go out to
When
Seattle.
I go
Oh,
out to
no,
Seattle, yeah,
and point
no,
out all electric cars.
no. Actually, we talked about UFOs.
Oh, nice,
We
nice.
sh- we share a similar interest. I wouldn't call it a passion, but an interest in UAPs.
Oh, that's yeah. I've probably told you before about my friend who worked in security at Area
Uh huh.
51, and
Yep.
and he says, I don't know if the stuff was alien or not, but it sure didn't look like it
But
should be
it
flying, and
but it shouldn't be flying. Yep.
there was a lot of weird stuff going on the base, but you know,
Well, Russ, if you watch News Nation, has Russ Coulthart, the Australian journalist who has, of
mhm,
course, kind of taken this up as one of his key areas of interest, was just down in oh come on, Arizona. Ah, got to think of the name. The place of the famous Red Rock, Sedona.
mhm,
Sedona. He was just down in Sedona, and there's a lady down there that gives tours where she gives the people on the tour. She goes up to a place near what's called something like the Sycamore Canyon area,
mhm,
and so she gives everybody state of the art infrared goggles, and they
mhm,
stare up at the sky at night just after sundown and things, and they see all kinds of stuff that
mhm.
cannot be explained. So yeah, so it's an interesting area for a lot of people. What powers it? I assume it's electric somehow or another.
Yeah, nowadays with the advent of how common drones are, I would imagine, that most, you know,
No,
UAPs are
no,
probably drone related, but
no.
maybe not. But it does make you wonder. There's so many more things in the air, right?
Well,
And at
there's lots of
night,
things in
if
the air, but
something,
drones are, the most common drones are that we think of are the small ones, right? I've got
right?
one just upstairs, 300 feet in the air, and I can't hear it or see it, right?
Yeah.
These people are seeing stuff that are 5 and 6 miles away. Obviously, there are military helicopters because of the strobe light, but there are other things that those helicopters, whoever they belong to, are escorting that are not helicopters. But anyway, that's a story for another
Yeah.
day. We'll save that. Let's move on and get back to the Earth
All right.
and the planet we know and love.
All right. So we don't have a whole lot of Hungarian news as a regular part of EV World, but we're going to talk a little bit about BYD plans to set up a European headquarters in Hungary, of all places.
Hmm.
They're opening in Budapest, and they're building a passenger car plant in Hungary. It's stepping up its efforts to expand into the European market. They signed a strategic cooperation agreement with the Hungarian government in the country's capital of Budapest on May 15th, which would have been 5 days ago. And the president's Prime Minister Viktor Orban and BYD
No.
chairman Wang Chuanfu. Um, and they'll establish a research and development center in Budapest as well. So this is interesting because BYD is Tesla on the global stage in the EV space. They would be sort of Tesla's competitor, although they say they're not trying to compete with Tesla, they're trying to compete with Toyota.
Right.
So it's
Well,
interesting to
whatever.
see. Yeah, but they're always compared to Tesla. Um, let's see. The company launched the Sea Lion 7 locally in Hungary in February. So they're supplying electric vehicles to Hungary from China before local production begins.
Yeah.
Still, they're going to offer the Atto 3, the Dolphin, the Seal U, and the Tang. The Atto 3 is the Yuan Plus in China, and the Seal U is a Song Plus EV. They got lots of names for these.
Lots of names.
Man,
At least they have figured out what they're going to name their vehicles, unlike another car company that is still trying to figure. Oh, and I should add, there's now a new one. You know, we
oh
had a
yeah,
problem with Toyota trying to figure out what they're going to call their EVs. They came up with this busy for whatever, right?
Busy Forks. Yeah.
Yes. So Volkswagen now has announced that they're going to start going back to more traditional car names. And the first one they introduced was they're coming out with a front wheel drive electric version of the Golf, which is basically was the successor of the Beetle, right?
Hmm.
So they've decided we're going to go back and start naming our cars with kind of regular names instead of ID3 and ID4 and I whatever, right? So that's interesting to
One of my
see.
neighbors, I'd swear, had an electric Golf a few years ago, and it might have been something that was from like 10. It might have been 10 years old. Okay, but it was some random, like Volkswagen electric car, and I'm thinking it was a Golf.
Well, I don't think they had one, and I can't think of the name of it now, but they did have very early on. This would have been probably in the early teens. They did
Hmm.
have an all electric Volkswagen, and the name slips me at the moment, but it was a very small uh,
Yeah.
compact car. Wasn't the Golf? I don't think they ever until
Okay, maybe it
now
wasn't.
have done the
I didn't
Golf.
pay much attention to the name of it. I just knew it was a Volkswagen, and it was all electric
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I had talked to them about it. And they
I
had
didn't.
solar and all that.
Yeah, I didn't realize they'd actually brought those over here. I thought those were strictly, European. But you can get exemptions. If you're living over there and you buy a car over there, you can bring it into the country, although it has
Yeah,
to have.
it's likely maybe the husband served in Germany or something.
Yeah, yep,
Yeah, and they brought the car back.
yep.
So that was probably a likely thing. But I know that their next car they bought was a Rivian R1T. So
Good
yeah,
for them.
yep. All right, let's see. Let's talk about this Experian article, Driving the Switch, Key
Yeah,
EV Features Determining Buyer Decisions. It's not just EVs, hybrids are getting into the mix. The Experian survey found that 65% of respondents said they prioritize battery life, 62% consider price, 58% are concerned with a range on a full battery, and 53% are focused on infrastructure and maintenance. Now, that whole thing is 65% about battery life, because there's a lot of people out there who think that an EV battery only is good for like 40 or 50,000 miles. So they're comparing it to the 12-volt battery
right.
in the car, which they're not similar.
No, nowhere near. You're talking about a instead of one single. Well, there's multiple cells in any 12-volt battery, but it's not like the thousands that are inside of an electric car battery, and it's completely different chemistry. One is lead-based chemistry, unless there's somebody has modified. You can buy lithium-based 12-volt batteries. And
Hmm.
the guys that, for example, the guys that I know that do experimental aircraft will sometimes buy those for their aircraft to start the motor because it's lighter. And so they
Oh,
can,
okay.
and weight is very important, particularly in experimental aircraft. So they'll buy those. But generally, you're talking about, lead acid battery that goes in and runs the electronics and wakes up the system in your car. It's the same thing that turns over the generator in a gasoline car.
Yeah, essentially EV batteries are expected to last 300 to 400,000 miles,
Yeah.
way beyond what a typical person would ever
And
own
now, yeah,
a
and
car.
now you're seeing all kinds of articles coming up. I just posted one today where this guy had there was like 218,000 miles on the car, and it still had 85% over 85% state of charge. After 200 and like I said, 215, 218,000 miles. So yeah, they're clean Titans. They're lasting a lot longer than I think even the car makers assumed they would. I mean, that was the whole point of setting up the Redwood Recycling Company. that God, I can't remember his name now, but formerly the one of the lead engineers at Toyota set up this company to recycle batteries. And the problem is the batteries are lasting longer than we thought they were going to last, which is great.
One of the things, like Clean was saying, the batteries are expected to last a certain amount of time, and then
Thank you, Joel.
if a EV is wrecked or is taken off the market for some reason, that EV battery can just put into battery backup. And I know that Tesla, when they take back batteries and replace them, they take those batteries and they may fix them or just simply put them into energy storage at their
Yep.
factories.
There is, in fact, I watched over the weekend a video of a guy that had bought the battery pack out of a wrecked Tesla. I mean, this was a really wrecked car. You show what it looked like. The pack was intact. So he took it and he showed you how he gradually stripped pieces out, one by one, finally ripping away the protective covers and things to get down. And that's what he was going to do. He was going to remove the cells out of the battery pack and then build himself a backup battery system for his home or his business or whatever he was going to do with it. But he advised in there, do not do this at home. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of juice there, and he was the techniques he was using to remove, because a lot of these things are not only screwed down, they're glued down, and there's multiple layers of stuff that you've got to peel away just to get to those cells. So you want to know what you're doing before you start to take one of those battery packs apart. Then besides, you got to know electronics to figure out how to put it back together so that it makes a practical backup battery storage system.
Yeah, I think even Mike Herzog would probably find that to be a daunting task.
I would imagine.
We've had some interesting discussions, about the ideas of putting a cloth on the charging handle at a Tesla charger, and then pouring water on it while it's charging to make it charge faster. And that's supposed to be the trick that people use in the heat to because the hotter the handle gets, the less energy it'll pump because it thinks it's going to overheat, and so people pour water on it.
So you use evaporative cooling, right?
Yeah.
Wicks the heat out of the handle.
Oh, geez, that just seemed like such a bad idea. Oh, man. Yeah. But let's see. So 55% of respondents said they consider a new hybrid, and 50% said they consider a new EV for their next vehicle purchase. On the used side, 38% said they consider an EV, and 42% said they would consider a hybrid. Let me see. More granularly, it said 67% of Gen Z and 61% of millennials are likely to buy a new EV, while 62 and 63% of these groups expressed interest in purchasing a hybrid. Gen Z and millennials also showed a stronger than average interest on the used side, with both showing 57% interest in buying an EV and 49 and 52% on a hybrid. The younger generations are definitely more interested in an EV, so that's good going down the road. So that should increase
I
sales.
I don't know if you see this in your neighborhood, but I'm seeing a lot of youth, and I'm saying these kids are probably 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, riding the upright electric scooters around. They're just zipping around. And I'm thinking, as I said a long time ago, I said the kids that are growing up now, these are the 4, 5, 6 years olds, and their parents are buying them these little electric cars, right? Replicas of Mercedes or replicas of Teslas. And they're right. I said, it's a good chance that by the time that kid gets to where he's driving, that he won't even be interested in an internal combustion engine car. He said, well, since I was a kid, I drove electric. What's the problem? It'd be interesting to track that. If there's a college student working on a thesis or something, this might be an interesting sociological study. Get a bunch of the kids that have grown up with electric scooters and little electric cars and see what happens as they mature and get older and what their buying preferences are. And I bet there'll be a strong preference to EVs just simply because of that experience.
Yeah, you would think that, right? You would think that, but a lot of people compare driving an EV to driving a golf cart. Because well,
No, no,
no, but I've heard lots of people talk about,
no,
oh, it seems that way.
no freaking comparison. It's like
No,
going from a prop plane to a jet.
yeah,
And I've done both, right?
hmm
So it's there's no, I've flown in, DC sixes, and
hmm
I've flown, and my first trip across the Atlantic was in a Boeing 707 operated by then TWA. Okay, this was back in the 60s, and
hmm
there's no comparison. So I mean, once you go electric, you really seriously, unless you like noise and you like gear shifters and things like that, you
yeah.
just don't want to go back. So anyway, okay, enough
No, it's
ranting.
stupid speed. But anyways, it was interesting that Experian actually released something on this topic, or that they did a survey on it. And I mean, you and I both know that so much of the EV transition is simply whatchamacallit, education in the space.
Yeah,
So
and unfortunately, also, like they say about science progresses at the rate at which the last the last oldest scientist died. Just you know, we grow up a certain way with certain things, and that's the way it's going to be. And we're very hard to change as people. And that's just
yes.
so. The more these kids start riding, the parents buying them these kick scooters, I call them, the sooner we'll make that transition.
All right. Well, so, it's in the title of the episode, and somebody already mentioned it in the chat. According to the International Energy Agency, this year will hit 25% of all EVs, or I'm sorry, of all cars sold
Cars, yeah,
worldwide, of all
worldwide.
cars worldwide will be electric. Now, I'm not sure if that's including plug-in hybrids. I'm assuming it is, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I don't know either. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and they expect we're on course for 40% by 2030. Now, it's funny because the U.S. is obviously, of big
a
countries,
laggard.
it's the slowest in
It's the
adoption
slowest.
to EVs. So
Well,
that's
among the large developing, I mean, you go into South America, or you go into the planetary south, of
mhm.
the equator and things, and it's where there's more poverty and more political division and all those kinds of things. So yeah, the
Well,
in the developing world, certainly, yes,
so in those parts of the world, though, you have both a lack of infrastructure for gas cars and a lack of infrastructure for
yeah,
EVs. And this was funny. I was listening to Jordan Peterson interview the CEO of Nano Nuclear, and he was talking about one of the biggest things is basically energy poverty. People who have 100% access to electricity um, all year, all the time. Their basic low standard of living is about $7,000 equivalent per year, and but without energy, it's like $1,000 a year,
yeah, yep,
and so that's a big difference. And this is part of the challenge for clean energy is all these countries in Africa are told they can't get money from the World Economic Fund if they power things up with fossil fuels. Okay. So on the one hand, they're trying to stay clean. On the flip side, it's keeping their people in poverty. And so this is one of the things, it's like possibly nuclear can solve some of that, but it's just another one of those things. It's like
yeah,
the cheapest nuclear power plants are still going to run 100 to $300 million.
yeah, yeah.
So we're and that's really getting on the inexpensive side.
Oh
Um,
yeah, because no, you talk about a normal, 70s era, nuclear power plant, you're talking in the billions of dollars.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
if you're talking, Joel, about the stuff, the pictures like in China, they weren't completely new. They just weren't used much. There was a couple of Chinese ride sharing or
Yeah.
vehicle sharing companies that went bankrupt after buying all of these like $4,000 to $5,000 EVs. They were really cheap EVs, and they ended up just getting parked in a field, and
It
that people
was,
are calling
yeah,
it this is like the electric vehicle graveyard in China. They
yeah.
weren't unsold cars. It's like they belonged to somebody.
There's some guys I listen to that do a podcast on China, and they covered not only did you have these graveyards of electric cars that were basically failed government promotion and basically Chinese scams. But
Hmm.
you also had the same thing happen with their electric bike share system, where you've got literally acres of electric bikes piled up that were all part. It was just part of a, the unfortunately a corrupt government scheme, corrupt private schemes using government funds that ended up producing all these bikes that ended up cluttering streets, that ended up getting collected by the governments and then piled literally in mountains. Well, figuratively, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them.
figurative in mountains, over there, and those electric cars that you saw parked and gathering weeds and things was the same thing, only on a car level instead of a bike level. It was just mismanaged, and it was just endemic corruption in the Chinese culture, unfortunately.
Yeah. Joel was saying something about some of this was like in Europe too, or in England, but I don't know what the story might be. You know, in England, it could be something similar. So, England does have US has a couple of them too, where they're doing kind of like the Lime bicycle or Lime bikes and Lime
Right.
scooters, but they're doing it with cars. And I've seen people I've had people approach me about helping them with, doing that like in Florida and stuff like that, and they never could get their funding. But there's like 6 or 7 of these companies in the UK
Yeah.
and trying to do this where you can go and rent a car for like an hour or two
Yes.
and you drop it off somewhere and the company takes care of you have to drop it off at the right spot so it can be charged, but
Right.
and then the company will occasionally rearrange and move the vehicles to where they're getting used the most. But yeah, I don't know what the situation may be, and it could be unsold cars too, but because you get the cars come over in these big ships, and what do we figure? Some of these BYD ships can hold like 7,000 cars.
Oh, huge number of cars.
Yeah, so you're going to have
Mind-boggling.
really high amounts of cars showing up all at one time on these BYD ships.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to have some of that, and people always like to act like that's some kind of problem. But I've even seen pictures in China of the cars all being staged to go on the ship, and it's just an incredible
Acres,
amount of cars. Yeah,
acres of
acres and
cars.
acres of
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that I don't know that that's anything
But to be
that's terribly
fair,
significant.
I've also seen stories in the past and photos in the past of gas cars piling up and being parked on abandoned runways in the hundreds or in the thousands too. Gas cars. So
Well,
this
that
is
was that way with full size pickup trucks
yep,
last year.
yep, yep.
Yeah, so now I don't know about that piling. I don't know about cars being piled up, but anyways,
Well, they'd be hard. You wouldn't be driving them. It's inventory that somebody invested in and made an unwise choice at some level. So anyway, okay,
well, so
moving on.
here's some interesting stats here. So while China has half of all of its car sales in 24 were electric, the number of EVs sold in China last year, more than 11 million, is the total sold worldwide in 2022. So only 2 years earlier, the
Yeah,
total for the whole world, China did that by itself
yep,
last year. Um,
amazing.
and it's 1 in 10 cars in the US. Um, it's just, and in Europe, it's around 20% right now. So
Right.
it's interesting kind of to see where that is ramping up to. Let's see. Um, let's see. Pictures were. Yeah, I don't know. It's. Um,
I would guess so photoshopped. I don't know why. I have never seen any photos where they're actually. Oh, I take that back. There are photos available of cars, electric cars stacked one on top of the other at the General Motors test track where they brought all of the 2,500 EV1s that had been out for lease and had crushed them and stacked them one on top of the other. So, yes, there are pictures of electric cars stacked one on top of the other, but that was the result of the General Motors recall in the early 2000s.
yes, California is at 25% EVs.
Yep.
Yeah, and you look at it. There's always this talk that California is like the world's fifth largest economy by itself, and so I think that's a fairly significant, figure when you look at that. All right, let's see. All right, here's a quick article. Rivian has signed a lease for 95,000 square feet near Irvine, California for a new headquarters. Nothing real special there. I mean, they're obviously not going to be manufacturing anything there, but it looks like they're gonna. That's a pretty big. It's pretty big for office space,
Yeah.
95,000. When I saw
Yeah.
95,000 square feet, I was like, that's not really a lot of space for manufacturing. But yeah, if it's just office space, that's a lot of space. So you get a lot of people working in a building that
Yeah.
size.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Joel, that's the same guys I listen to. And I found out while my daughter was here this weekend that she's been listening to those guys since they were in China. And she knows their Chinese nicknames, whatever it is. And I can't tell you, I looked it up and I can't tell you. One of them is a South African and the other one's an American. And they do a very informative program of what China is really like, not the veneer that is often portrayed in the mainstream media. I'm good. Look at me. I'm using that term. Uh, but yeah, it's a very very good show. If you guys get a chance to, if you're interested in finding out another perspective of China, be sure to watch those guys. And if Joel, if you can write down their names or maybe the name of the podcast, we'd appreciate that.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. I've been to Irvine before. I don't remember it being anything particularly special about it, but that's okay.
Apart from an empty office building that needed somebody to fill up 95,000 square feet.
Yeah. I was telling somebody that a business he wanted to start up is the best place in his area was Atherton, California, which is in the Bay Area, and the average home price there is $7.4 million. That's the median home price in
Median
Atherton.
home price.
Median
Yeah.
home price, So it's like that means that's the average home, 7.4 million.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody about it. He goes, yeah, you're not going to find commercial space in that town. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's just a bedroom community. But it
Yeah.
was like, Eric Schmidt and, a few other, one of the,
High
people,
rollers. Yeah.
yeah, people founders, a lot of big tech companies and stuff live there. Oh yeah, that's nice. That's nice. That's why people like to live out there in California. It's for the weather. It's why they're willing to pay the high taxes and put up with everything else. All right, let's talk about CATL or CATL for those of you who want to correct me.
CATL, Contemporary Amp.
Yeah, people in Nebraska call it cattle. Okay, so this is a Nebraska EV World Show. So it's Nebraska centric. Yeah. So, anyways, we're going to talk about what I've said is the best idea I've seen yet for semi trucks in the EV space.
I added that specifically for you, Dave.
Well, I appreciate that.
I saw that and said, Dave will like this one.
Yeah,
You've been evangelizing this for some time now.
Well, because this makes sense to me. Yeah. Okay, we hear all the arguments. I've learned enough working with you, Bill, and working with Mike, that there's certain things the grid can handle and can't handle. right? And I think that, so what we see here looks like it's a car wash for trucks, but it's a battery swap facility. And so this truck is going to roll into this building, and this blue area here is going to get pulled out, which that's batteries. It's going to be pulled out on both sides. More batteries are going to be slapped in. So what this allows you to do is, this building here is automated. It can be full of batteries being charged that can be storing energy from the grid to stabilize the local grid. You could have, and it has this big open space out here, that could all be solar arrays or wind turbines or whatever. You could be collecting power from there that could be stored on those batteries or recharged on those batteries. And as trucks come in, they're only there for 5 minutes, which is no longer than when somebody would normally stop and buy fuel for a tractor trailer. And plus, it stabilizes the local grid with all of the battery tech.
Yeah.
Okay, so it serves dual use, and it just makes a lot more sense than trying to have, 1.2 megawatt chargers on each side trying to power these, and you're having to put such an enormous strain on the grid to get power to these locations. It's a lot of energy to deliver. It takes, to deliver 1 megawatt of energy, you need about 5 acres of solar. Okay, and that's only when when there's during daylight. So during the hours, to have it 24 hours a day, you probably need 3 times that, plus battery storage. But this can be the battery storage, right? So then you don't have to pay for separate battery storage, but you have to have a lot of battery packs sitting there, right? So you'd probably, in my mind, you'd probably need 20 battery packs or more, maybe a lot more than that, sitting there constantly being charged, absorbing all of the energy from renewables in the area, on top of whatever else is giving it steady state constant energy, and then they're constantly filling back up. Still going to be a massive strain on the grid.
Yeah, wouldn't you like to know the numbers that CATL came up with to make this a reality? Because that's obvious. What we're talking about is just those, well, how much, where's it going to be located? How much energy are we taking from the grid? How much solar or wind do we need to have? What do we expect the battery turnover to be as trucks coming through? That would be interesting to get a hold of some of those numbers.
So right now they're setting up 300 battery swap stations in 13 regions of China by the end of this year, by the end of 2025. Let's see. The battery swap network will cover 16 city clusters by 2030. And they can still plug in when a swap site is unavailable or time is less of a factor. So they still can do regular EV style charging, but they have this as well. Let's see. CATL CEO says they expect to see a 50% take rate for electrified trucks globally, with that growth fueled by the growing appetite for zero emission solutions and the ever-present push to reduce the cost of logistical operations. So I'm going to tell you something really interesting, that I was on a call with the CEO of a nuclear company last week, and we were discussing one of the parts of where SMR reactors can shine in these remote locations where people are doing remote mining, that they would have the nuclear plant there. They were giving an example of the extreme north in Canada. So in the north of Canada, where they're trucking in diesel to run their diesel generators so they can do mining, all of the tractors and other heavy equipment also run on diesel. Well, because of the fact of the bad weather, they have to truck in as much as 9 months supply in advance. And so everything's running on diesel. Well, one of the side things that the nuclear reactors help is to create clean hydrogen. Now, economics still suck on the hydrogen, but because of some of the factors going on, they can get it down to about the same cost as diesel, especially when the diesel is being trucked in for 1,000 miles across. And so then they can power all the vehicles, not have any diesel trucked into the facility, and everything run on clean hydrogen at those facilities. So they're developing vehicles. I think Toyota and somebody else is developing the vehicles to be able to use hydrogen at these sites.
Oh,
And I
sure.
thought that was really interesting because it wasn't something that we've talked
Well,
about, and it's certainly not something in the news.
this was something that General Motors. The reason why they had me and a bunch of other journalists fly a junket to Idaho Falls was to emphasize or feature this part of it, that you could take nuclear energy and you could take that then and generate hydrogen that could be used in fuel cells, because at that point General Motors was still very much committed to development of fuel cell technology, and they had some fuel cell Equinoxes, I think it was, that were running around. I got an opportunity to drive one, I think it was during that particular point, but they were focused on it, and so they got a bunch of us, 20 journalists, 30 journalists, whatever it was, paid our way to Idaho Falls to tour the nuclear research facility there. So that's a very, very viable kind of approach. Again, if we can cover the figure out how to make up the difference in the cost, because that, as we've talked about in the past, that's a very big, expensive, outlay to generate that kind of energy. Unless, of course, we can find, like they just announced in Western Australia, let's see now, what was it called? Hydrogen, I forget the name now, dang it. No, thermogenic hydrogen. Do you know what that is?
Thermogenic?
Thermogenic
I haven't heard about
hydrogen.
this one.
Okay, well, if you get a chance, go to the website, punch the AI Insight button, and you'll get a write-up, because I had to look this up and I thought, I got to share this. So the way I share that is put it in our AI, because I asked Google's AI, what the heck is thermogenic hydrogen? And it gave me an answer. So basically, it's just hydrogen that the Earth, using various methods, has generated, and we could potentially capture, instead of having to take it out of natural gas and reform it, or take it out of wind energy and using electrolyzers, that kind of thing. It's just there, and apparently Australians have found a large reservoir of it in Western Australia. So, and we also, by the way, they found a large reservoir of it right under our feet here, Dave. Stretching basically from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachians, apparently is a ideal location for also thermogenic hydrogen. So
Yeah, well,
take a look.
Clean makes a couple of good points. He's talking about hydrogen here are being shut down around the world. It's losing a lot of money. Yeah, we've talked about this. The economics of hydrogen suck.
Yep.
They really do. When I was giving an example in northern Canada, was one of the few practical applications I've actually liked, and I could say, yeah, that actually makes sense for hydrogen, because so many of them are just it's just wishful thinking. And in this particular case, due to the remote location,
Yep.
and the fact that they're able to produce it close to the cost of diesel, makes a lot of sense. And but the comment on takes a decade or more to build nuclear power, and they're always way overpriced. So I'll probably start talking about it more. I'm getting involved in the selling of nuclear reactors, and so what's happening is now these new fourth generation reactors, which can't melt down, can be manufactured in a facility. This is what's coming up. This hasn't happened yet. There's not like a Ford-like assembly line yet for these reactors, but in the next 5 years, there will be. And it'll be possible for you to, by 2030, you'll be able to order a nuclear reactor and have it installed by 2032. Okay, so
Cool.
This is where we're at now. We're not talking big reactors. We're talking a reactor that can fit in a 20-foot shipping container, not a 40-foot shipping container. We could send a couple reactors like that, but this is real. The first the company I'm doing consulting for is expected to have its first fourth generation nuclear reactor operating in North America by 2029. Okay. And I was going to say Kairos Power just got a building permit to start building the building for an SMR, which is a small reactor, somewhere, I think in Illinois. They just got that last week and they made a big announcement about it. But there's a bunch of new things going on where there's some movement to make the Nuclear Regulatory Commission speed up permitting process in the U.S. So and when that news came out, almost all the nuclear power stocks went up 50% in the past 2 weeks. Yeah, some of them shot up. NuScale, which makes small, they call them small react. They went up 50%. They went from like $4 billion to $6.5 billion market cap on that news. So that's a big change. And Joel, that project in Florida, I think it's called VOT or Voight, or it's not spelled like Voight. But anyways, they have Generation 3 reactors there. A couple of them are online. I think the last one isn't, but they're the only reactors that were approved by the NRC in the last 25 years in the US. And the US is really, really behind in that space. And other countries have kind of passed up. And a whole lot of new things have happened. There's now there's a company in Tennessee at Oak Ridge now that's got license and opened up that's going to manufacture nuclear fuel in the United States, which hasn't been done for about 20 years. Most nuclear fuel is refined in Kazakhstan currently. Yeah, Bobby, we you know, I never want to seem like a hater on hydrogen, okay? I was just kind of enthused that somebody actually had a useful use case, and it was one of the more compelling use cases I'd heard, but it's never come up in any of our news topics, so I brought it up. Yeah, and so, but this is also kind of the thing, though, with the hydrogen and the nuclear. It's the idea that both the energy and the hydrogen are created at the user. They're not being created and then trucked. They're being created at the user. So one of the big expenses in all electricity, for instance, in Canada, they can generate hydroelectric for less than 3 cents, and then they transmit it to wherever. Yeah, they sell it to the U.S. for like 4 cents. Okay, in the northeastern United States, but the people who actually get it in their houses pay 22 cents. Okay, that cost is what the utility company needs to transmit that energy and still turn a profit. And their profits in the utility space are moderated by the government. So I think they're not allowed to make more than a 10% net profit. So that does mean the executives get paid really well, though. But still, they can only trickle down so much to the shareholders. Let me see. How would you transport it? They have difficulty getting electricity where EV chargers are going. I'm not sure if you're discussing the hydrogen or the nuclear, but the nuclear would just be hauled on the back of a semi. The hydrogen would be created at the job site. We were talking about remote job sites and using nuclear energy to produce the stuff. And there was all these side bonuses. So when you have a nuclear reactor, and we're talking small nuclear reactors, you get about 20% of the amount of electricity you create. You also generate about that much energy and heat. And that heat can be used for either in manufacturing. Yep. The big ones were desalination. So you can desalinate salt water, and this is perfect for island nations. You can use it for purification of water. So where there's polluted water, you can clean the water up. There was use of, I didn't understand how you would use this for hydroponics other than maybe heating up the water.
No, I could, you would want it to keep the water temperature at a stable temperature year round. That depends on the species of fish that you are cultivating as part of your hydroponics. I have a lot of experience in that area. So
yeah, so clean. We want to keep hydrogen out of Nebraska. No, I'm just kidding. The truth is, the economics of using clean energy to make hydrogen just suck. It just really does. It's just, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's a caught
Even
by the
even using the clean energy to make it, it still generally costs twice as much as producing diesel.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have an issue that number one, your wind turbine farms are located in remote areas. So you have to take that hydrogen, and when you generate, you have to run that wind, that electricity, have to run it through an electrolyzer. Then you have to store it. Then you have to figure out how to move it from where it is to where it's needed, and that generally is going to require some kind of a trucking operation. And then when you do move it, presumably you're going to want to use some of that energy to power the truck. So, and there have been studies that were done 20 years ago that showed that it was just simply not economical to do that. Because you're going to have that truck using half of the fuel. I forget the exact number, but a significant fraction of the fuel in the storage tank to move the truck and get it to where, the gas station or wherever you're going to distribute it to. So the just economics just don't make sense. Now, using it to make fertilizer for hydrogen, that has possibilities, definitely, because now you're talking about changing. But again, you're dealing with the economics. Are there other better ways to do that? So yeah, I would, I was in on this game, if you will, from the very start. When the ball began to roll, and the Ford Motor Companies and the hydrogen guys convinced the government, you don't need your EV mandate to build electric cars. We're going to go to hydrogen, and hydrogen will become the perfect fuel. And of course, then things started to go downhill from there. It has a place, and it will find a place that'll make sense economically. But at the moment, it is a solution looking for an answer. If that is that the way to put it, I don't recall. But anyway,
Yeah. So Joel, on your comment about the small nuclear plants, there has been people who tried to make 1 megawatt reactors. There has been some work. There was a company that just went bankrupt last year called Ultra Safe Nuclear. And I've been talking to one of their execs. I've been thinking about having him. He wants to meet in New York City and have a couple beers and tell me everything that went wrong. I'd really like to get him to get on camera and tell
oh
us
yeah,
everything
let's
went
do
wrong. That would be
that.
really good content.
Yeah.
I know he'll tell me, but
Does he want to go public with it though?
I don't know if he wants to really.
Yeah.
It's much long. I criticize CEOs on here a lot, of different companies that have failed in the EV space. He's got some real harsh criticisms for some people, and I've seen this. See, a lot of the public companies, so nobody's been able to deliver a reactor yet in that space, and it's not mainly because of them. It's mainly because of rules by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So the technology's there to make safe nuclear power, and um, and bring it to light. But the problem is getting through the NRC is delaying things. That's why, like I was telling you, I said North America, not it'd be the first in the United States.
Well, we were talking earlier about the blackout in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal,
Mhm.
southern part of France, and that, what could have brought that about. So, because of that event, the Danish government has announced that they are reversing their decision not to build any more nuclear power plants. They have decided that they're going to get serious about looking at nuclear as a generation source for the country, which had been a big player. I mean, a lot of what we've seen in the way of wind development is done by the Danes, and so they looked at what happened in Spain, which has a lot of wind energy down there, and they've devoted a lot of that. In fact, there were points at which I think 90+% of the energy being used in Spain was coming from renewable sources. That's how much are. So the Danish government has decided to take another look at what role nuclear could play, and maybe the SMRs are a possible way to go. I still have my reservation because I still want to know what happens to the spent fuel? What do we
Right.
do with that? So,
And one of the talks of that is repurposing it for medical uses and other things like that. I just don't know if there's going to be enough medical use of
yeah,
spent fuel, because I look at what the Navy does. They've got all of these, their spent fuel. Most of it's in Idaho, and they've just never really done anything with it. They store it there, but it's
yeah.
not really considered to be
I've
the end of life for it.
I've stood on top of the pool where those are and could see them glowing down an iridescent blue down in the storage pool there. Yeah,
Oh, nice, nice. Um, Yeah, so I really don't know. But one of the things too, these small nuclear reactors, they're just a tool in the energy space. They're not they can't produce energy as cheaply as wind and solar.
oh yeah,
So
yeah,
where they shine is on islands that are currently burning bunker fuel or diesel, which is a large part of the world. All your Caribbean islands, all of your island nations in the Pacific, all of their power plants, they're not powered on coal. They're all burning bunker fuel, which is like the dirtiest fuel possible, um, for their energy, and their energy is really expensive. So in these places, the economics of these small nuclear reactors makes sense. It doesn't make as much sense for grid scale, although it is possible. But when the ones that somebody was mentioning earlier in Georgia, those are grid scale reactors,
yeah,
and those cost billions.
yeah.
We're talking um, up to 100, well, let's just say 75 megawatts of energy from nuclear. It's gonna right now would probably run about $300 million. That includes the buildings, the reactors, the fuel, everything, and then it'd be a matter of then selling the energy. But it only works economically in places that need that much energy, and which is everywhere, and just where it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, but
Hey, just let me make a comment to Clean Titan there. The BESS, I believe, referred to as battery energy storage systems. One of the things, in fact, I've got a link or an article I published on flow batteries, redox flow batteries. There's a lot being done in the way of large scale. We're not talking 12-volt type batteries or even Tesla type batteries. We're talking, in the one case of the one company, a startup down in Texas, we're talking about repurposing oil storage tanks, right, at a refinery kind of a level, and using those as batteries for this redox flow chemistry that is just ideal for storing energy at a grid scale to make up the difference when the sun goes down or the wind's not blowing. And I think that's an area that we're going to see some really interesting growth in that area.
so I see this. We had an article to cover today on flow batteries. It says
Yep,
it can discharge electricity for days or even weeks at a
days
time,
or
depending
weeks
on the
on end. Yep,
formula and the architecture. So they
yep,
could store enough renewable energy to provide large energy consumers, but you have to have enough energy to go into the batteries, right?
right, right.
Yeah, and so that's one of the challenges too. Clean. I get the argument on the islands. Um, I'm like I said, I'm a proponent of solar and other stuff. I know that I've brought one of the original founders of Earth Day on board, and he represents 27 island nations, and he'd like to see us do SMRs on those islands. For some reason, solar and wind has been a non-starter for some of them, and I'm not really sure why. I know that I've looked at Jamaica, and I know that some of their cost to produce wind and battery storage there is actually higher than nuclear. It's higher than it should be. So, like, we can produce and solar energy in Nebraska for about 7 cents a kilowatt hour, but in Jamaica, for some reason, it's more like 12 to 14.
Hmm.
And I'm not really sure. Nebraska isn't exactly a sunny, super solar efficient place.
It's not
So
Arizona, thankfully.
yeah, yeah. So I don't really understand why it's not. I just know I'm dealing with people who are actually having to spend the money, and they know what that how that works out, because there's certain efficiencies. Nuclear is 100% almost, well, so let's just say it's 99% efficient. Solar is considered to be about 14% efficient. So I'm not sure exactly. So when you put in 100 megawatts of solar, it only produces the equivalent of about what 14 megawatts of nuclear would do. And nuclear also has the added benefit of producing the heat that can be used for other purposes.
And
And
you've got a
so,
smaller footprint too, so that's a plus.
yeah, so it makes for an interesting conversation. Um,
Can I
yeah,
interject a question for
Jesus,
our audience?
sure.
I'd love to hear an answer to this. Coming up in June is supposed to be the launch of Tesla's yet to be named taxi service, automated taxi service, right? The government will not allow them to get a trademark on robotaxi nor on cyber taxi. So we don't know exactly what they're going to end up calling this thing.
Tuber.
Tuber, there we go, tuber. But anyway, I've got a bunch of articles that you could link to. Just do a search for robotaxi or Tesla or whatever. But anyway, there's a sort of divided perspective on, is this going to happen or not, right? Are they going to launch in June with the operation in Austin or not, right? I'd like to, if you want to comment, share your comment in the field down below, because this is becoming a really interesting issue. There was a lot of people saying ain't going to happen, or if it does, it's not going to happen the way we think it might happen, right? Where you just get in and the car goes where you tell it to go. Will there be drivers behind the scenes, actually steering the vehicles remotely, or will it just not happen because the technology just isn't there compared to where, Waymo and those people are. So did you know, by the way, Waymo is operating in 4 cities and they're doing 250,000 drives a week.
Wow.
250,000 drives a week in just 4 cities.
That's impressive. No matter what they decide to call it, no matter what they decide to call their full self or their taxi service, I'm going to call it Tuber.
There we go.
So I'm always going to refer to it as Tuber, because Tesla Uber sounds so much funnier. And people are going to
that
know
sets up you if
exactly
you're
people are going to know exactly what I'm referring to when I call it Tuber. I'm going to order
tuber.
a
Okay.
Tuber.
Yeah. Yeah, that thing kind of does look, that car does kind of look like a potato,
Yeah, I mean, you got it from different angles. You got the potato look,
Right.
along with,
Yeah.
people, when you call it that, they know you mean a Tesla self-driving car, that's a taxi service.
Yeah.
Um, oh, there you go. This is funny. If I was hammered on acid, I might get into a car with nobody driving it by accident. Yeah. 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 Well, let me see. Waymo is going to DC and
Yeah.
Atlanta, Miami, and
Yep.
Tokyo next year. Yeah, they're getting there. Their only problem is their cars cost $300,000 a piece,
Yeah.
and so it takes a lot for them to recover that. And it's not the fact that they're using Jaguars. They're taking a $60,000 car and they're adding $240,000 of
Yeah.
electronics to each
Yeah.
vehicle
Yeah.
to make it work.
Yeah. Did you aware of the controversy over that yet another controversy where Elon has pissed off his customers? They would not allow people who were leasees, right? Is
Hmm.
that right? The leasee or the leaseor? I can never remember which is which. But anyway, the people that were leasing Tesla Model 3s,
Mhm.
we're told you cannot buy the car at the end of the lease because we're going to use them as part of our robo, whatever it is,
Mhm.
taxi, right? Our AI taxi service. Then what they did is they didn't do that. They just simply took around them and sold them as used cars. So this has generated another level of friction between the company and clearly very loyal customers who loved what Tesla stood for, stands for. That's a whole nother topic we could get into. But yeah, they were going to take all those off lease Teslas and use them in the robo taxi service, and that's not happening now.
Yeah, I saw that. That was kind of interesting that they were not doing that. I wanted to get back to the thing about the rogue inverters. So this is really a pretty serious thing. So what's happening is, and what you were talking about with the Iberian Peninsula and all that, there's these theories that maybe uh, China could have turned some off. They could have tested, just through
Yeah,
these rogue inverters, so it's not. What's happening is solar panels and other things are having these inverters from China that have some weird piece of communications equipment that's not
yeah,
listed on the schematics for the
right.
product,
Yep.
and it's not making sense. And they're shipping these all over the world. So there's now these theories that
There is suspicion that the power outage in the Iberian Peninsula was a possible dry run for what was it? They were down about what 12, 15 hours, something like that. That it was a possible dry run where they could take and throw a switch, turn off the
mhm.
power in those inverters, which would all it takes is you get enough of them offline, and that has a cascading effect through the entire grid. And this is what happened in Spain. So the concern is among some people, at least, that that's a possibility of what happened, or in this case, Russian hackers attacking the European grid.
This sounds kind of
So
like those faulty pagers that Hamas got,
yeah,
or whatever Hezbollah got, 3,000 faulty pagers that all exploded at the same time in
yeah,
Lebanon.
yeah.
It sounds kind of like that kind of
The
type
battery
of
was a
activity.
battery was a bomb.
Yes. Um, but yeah, undocumented hardware could bypass firewalls is one of the scares. Um, the Department of Energy has acknowledged the challenge, is working to improve transparency around imported technology. Yeah, this makes you wonder. There's an awful lot of solar that hasn't gone on the grid yet,
Yep.
because
Well,
of bureaucratic backlog.
and that might turn out to be a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we're not trying to criticize green energy here, but there, China is not the best actor on the world stage. As much as we
no,
like to try to
no.
clean things up.
Yeah, they like I said, the two gentlemen. What was it? I think one of our commenters commented was chasing the truth or something like that. The
Mhm.
two guys from the South African and the American, who lived and worked and toured all of China on the back of their motorcycles. Um, they give an interesting. There's some other the China show and some others that give a more sober perspective on what's happening with respect to China and the rest of the world. So
All right. Well, while we're talking about solar, I had an article I wanted to cover about the best solar power countries in the world. So, what countries have the most solar per capita?
this
Now,
is
this
a
is
surprise.
Yeah, it really is. Now, one of them, I've always known that Australia was pretty big in this, right? You think of Australia, you think, oh, it's got to be sunny all the time, right? Number one, this is watts per capita. So,
Right.
this would mean, and I'm going to express this in kilowatts, okay, because it's easier for me to wrap this around my head. But and the Netherlands was number one,
Number one,
1.5
Netherlands.
kilowatts of um, per person in solar. Australia was close at 1.44 kilowatts per person, so it wasn't far behind. Germany was third at 1.2 kilowatts per person. That
Can
really surprises me because
that
two of
can I
those
inject?
countries are northern countries.
Can I inject something? I was born in a village called Grebendorf, which is located in the German state of Hessen, which is sort of in the northern part of Germany. So it's not, it's not the cloudiest part toward the north, but it's still behind my village, behind my house where I was born, right, is a giant solar field.
Oh, nice.
I I don't know when it was built, obviously since the Google took satellite images, but it wasn't there when I visited, oh God, I don't even want to say now, a long time ago. But that village and the surrounding community is getting a lot of their power from a solar field, which I find exciting. That's really cool. So anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
So,
living
Bill, you're letting
testimony of it.
people are going to start criticizing us. They know we live in Nebraska. They don't know that we were both born in Germany.
Yeah,
So it just starts getting a little weird when we talk about this because I was born in Berlin,
right.
and yeah, so it starts getting a little weird when we start, when people start knowing that. Yeah. Anyways,
9.
yeah, there you go.
Do I have a family crest? 9.
Yeah, my last name means like big nose tribe.
Yeah.
So, I got this impressive last name. Um, NASA is really common in the Berlin phone book.
Oh,
Anyways, yeah,
interesting.
yes, the NASAs. Yeah, um,
Well, by the
yeah,
way,
you
we
never
have a
know.
connection because my great grandmother on my father's side was from Berlin.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Yes, yes. All right. So the countries with the highest PV penetration. I don't know what PV pole
Photovoltaic.
photovoltaic.
Yeah.
Okay, Greece was number one. Netherlands was number two. Then Spain, Hungary, Chile, then Australia, Germany, Estonia, Cyprus. See, Cyprus makes sense, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
out in the middle of the, Mediterranean.
Sunny Eastern Mediterranean. Yep.
Yeah. Well, see, and there's an island nation with a lot of solar, right? Israel was really high. Malta, Lithuania, and Poland. Interesting. Most of these are European, with the exception of Chile and Australia and Israel, although Israel's might as well be European. Um, they're all European countries that really are at the top of the solar list. Greece leads the world with 28% of its electricity coming from solar power. So that is a big number. Poland was in 13th place. Well, that's unlucky Poland in 13th. Yeah, so the U.S. didn't really make the list. Well, the United States was 7.9%.
Yeah.
So we're right about 8%. The funny thing is when you combine solar, wind, and hydroelectric, the US is at like 24% now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of US power is coming, but a lot of that is wind energy, despite the fact that the current administration in the United States seems to have this, both the president and the vice president speak out against wind energy. I mean, it's funny to talk about, but like we live in Nebraska, and it's like, man, they replaced a nuclear power plant with wind here, because it's just so much cheaper, and so that makes
I'm
things.
just, yeah, I'm just looking up what our current, come on, Bill, type. Our
Bill,
current,
I've got in the title today trains. That's the only topic I haven't covered yet. So we're going to cover trains, and we're going to get off here because
yeah.
we've really gone over time today. So
Oh,
there's.
oh, right now,
Mhm.
this power grid of which our utility is a member is generating 55.6537% of our energy is coming from wind power.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. People have no idea how much wind contributes.
55%.
Yeah, so I mean, that's it. 55% is a big number. We had one day we were almost at 70%.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and
That's a rare
and
day, but yeah.
yeah, we have two nuclear power plants in Nebraska. One's been shut down for about 8 years now, and but we have a bigger one. The one that was shut down was two reasons. One, there was a flood, and the other thing was it was more expensive than renewables. But
Yeah, go ahead.
it was the smallest grid scale nuclear power plant in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay. When I say grid scale, I'm generally talking a gigawatt of energy. When I'm talking about these small reactors, I'm talking anything small. As the SMR is actually defined as anything 300 megawatts and below. And so some stuff like there's this $20 billion power plant that's got four 300 megawatt SMR reactors going in Canada, which is 1.2 gigawatts. It's still grid scale, even though it's SMR. The reason they're doing it is because Canada has special, easier to pass licensing rules for SMR. They categorize them differently, which is something the United States needs to do. It is a different situation. The level of safety, now those are third generation, or they call it generation 3+. They're not these fourth generation reactors I've been talking to you about. Okay.
Yeah.
So the fourth generation reactors cannot melt down. That's one of the biggies. But
safety deals,
yeah. So we've talked about this a few times about California being 100%. That, like last year, I think they had at least 10 days last year where they were at 100% of energy was coming from renewables.
and for multiple days.
Yeah, and for multiple days at a time. So there's certainly something to talk about there. So okay,
I follow. By the way, I follow Mark Jacobson.
So there's this topic: renewable energy on rails scheme to cure transmission line blues. So it looks like the idea here is to have these huge battery packs on the backs of trains running around and delivering power in these stored up batteries. Do you imagine if one of those things caught on fire? Yeah, that's going to be the next thing.
Tornado comes along like the one last week in western Nebraska and knocks over the entire train. Now, it was an empty coal train, fortunately, but it took and knocked over the completely, 100 and so whatever, 107 cars, knocked it completely over. This was out in western Nebraska last week.
Yeah,
so you don't want that happening.
Yeah, so it's U.S. startup SunTrain. It's one word, SunTrain, S-U-N train.
Yep.
And they want to load large batteries on freight cars, stuff them full of renewable energy, and ship them out to energy-thirsty locations. A transmission study from the Department of Energy from 23 indicates that the U.S. will need to double its current transmission network by 2040. We're talking 15 years to reach 115,000 gigawatt hours. The nation's rail system already racks up 100,000 miles worth of capacity. Running on almost 140,000 route miles, the U.S. freight rail network is widely considered the largest, safest, and most cost-efficient freight system in the world, according to the Department of Transportation. The idea is to leverage spare railway capacity, some of which has been created by a steep drop in the use of coal for power generation. Instead of mile-long trains full of coal, SunTrain wants to deploy freight trains as high-capacity rolling energy storage system. The company's aiming for a train length of 7,000 feet. Okay, which states it's about the same length as a typical coal train. Yeah. It can move gigawatt hours of renewable energy. It can deliver the energy of 2 nuclear power plants operating for an hour across the existing rail network to where it's needed. Now, when they say 2 nuclear plants, I'm assuming they're talking about each being a gigawatt. So I'm assuming they're talking about like 2 gigawatts going. So they're not going to be solar. They're just going to be battery storage. So they're still going to have to get their energy from somewhere. Okay.
Can I give you a personal example? Okay, last month my wife and I had to go out to eastern Washington State, and we drove through what's called the Palouse country, which is a beautiful part of the country. There's lots of wheat is grown there, and on one of the ridges through there is this line of wind turbines. And this road that we took to get to Moscow, Idaho, which is where we're going, is lined by a railroad track, and that track is only used basically once a year to pick up the harvested wheat from a handful of storage silos along the track. The rest of the time, it's not used. It sits empty. And I've been thinking. My original thought was, wouldn't it be cool to operate tour? You get this little thing that sits on the railroad track, and you pedal it, or you use solar energy, and you can tour that area on this. And I thought, this, however, makes a lot of sense. Is that you have these freight cars parked at the bottom of this hill where all these wind turbines are at the top of the hill, and you charge them, and you just periodically dispatch them to Spokane, or you dispatch them, to the Moscow, obviously, Lewiston, that area, or over to the Tri-Cities area, and maybe as far as Portland or Seattle, and they just shuttle these trains back and forth, all of them powered by those wind turbines. Well, that would be an interesting, because there's a lot. I forget, this particular rail system has something like 40,000 miles or some number like that of rail track that only gets used about once a year at harvest time.
I like this idea. Now, we like talking about trains on here, but this is actually a pretty good idea, I think. The next step is a 20-car grid-connected train totaling 384 megawatt hours, ferrying renewable from a former coal plant to another former coal site 125 miles away, where it will be discharged back onto the grid. The goal is to reduce the emissions from gas-fired peaker plants by capturing wind and solar energy that would otherwise be not used due to oversupply, and shift it to a location where it can be used during periods of peak demand. I could really see this being a thing. I mean, we talk about all of this energy that's not on grid right now. If there was a train, location by, some of these, miles of solar farms, they could certainly charge up a car and run it somewhere where there's a shortage of the energy and sell it. Now, some of this
it would use some. Obviously, you'd want to use some of that energy to power the
train,
the car itself, or the locomotive, or whatever. Yeah, so there'd be some of that used, but it would be an interesting thing. I'm curious to see how this develops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now we've got folks here in the Omaha area, Joel, that are I know. I'm sorry. I'll shut up after this. That are taking Freightliners and converting them just to full-on EV trucks, but they're using them. They're converting them from tractor trailer style more to like box truck style. Anyways, folks, we've really gone over time. We really appreciate everybody chatting. It makes it more interesting for us. We've had lots of people watching today.
This was fun.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll be back. We have a special guest with Mike from Arcady Energy tomorrow. And on Thursday, Bill and I have a special guest coming in from Siemens Corporation to talk to us. So anyways, that'll be great. Anyways, see you guys later.
Auf Wiedersehen.